crafters, Lisa here from Fun Stuff Crafts. So glad you could join me for another Inspiration Friday. So last week we had Chloe here with us and she helped me with youth gaiters. And she has come up with all kinds of ideas of different things that Auntie Lisa should be doing. And so one of the things that she said is, Auntie Lisa, you need to show people how to make scrunchies. Everybody needs them if you've got longer hair. And I'll tell you, I am one that uses scrunchies all the time. So we are going to learn how to make these really cute scrunchies. It is a quick, easy sewing project for a beginner sewer. And so if you hold on tight, that's going to be our project today. But before we get there, I just really want to thank you guys for stopping by my channel. If this is your first time, make sure you click on the subscribe down below and don't forget to click on that bell. YouTube will alert you each time I upload a new video. I try to do a new video every Friday. That's why we call it Inspiration Friday. So stay tuned. Hold on, I'm going to meet you back at my sewing table and we are going to make these cute scrunchies inspired by my niece, Chloe. Okay, crafters, let's get started on this tutorial on how to make scrunchies. So brought to you by Chloe. She has just been inspiring me with all kinds of blog ideas and she said this is a must-have. So we are going to start with what we need for this project. So to begin with, I just went out and I had some scrap material. You guys can see this is all cut. I had some scrap material and I grabbed it and I've already cut my piece and I'll show you that in just a second. So you need some material, 4 inches by 24 inches. So you should be able to grab some out of your stash. I just grabbed some 1/4 inch elastic. I also had a whole bunch in my stash. And then I used my rotary blade. I am going to use scissors and I've got just a couple pins I'm gonna need. Of course, my sewing machine, some thread, my handy ruler. I'm gonna use the iron and the ironing board also. So to start out the project, the very first thing you're going to do is you want to cut your fabric. Now I ended up cutting 2 pieces here so I can make 2 scrunchies, but basically all I have is I have got a piece that is 24 inches long by 4 inches. Now I've seen other people make them at 3.5 inches. I've seen people make them at 5 inches. That's your call. The key here is the 24 inches. The 24 inches is the length that's going to give you lots of play, be able to tie your scrunchie, and I know I do mine like 3 times in my hair. And then the other piece that you're going to need is 6.5 inches of elastic. Now I'm using 1/4 inch elastic. You could use a little bit thicker if you want. This just happened to be what I had in my stash. So the very first thing you need to do is definitely cut your fabric. So I did use my rotary blade and my ruler to make sure I had mine cut. One quick idea to think about is I like to cut my fabric when it's folded in half. It's a little bit easier to manage with my ruler, and then I use my grid mat that I always have and I just cut it with my rotary blade, and so I've got my piece. Same thing with my elastic. So once you have that, your next step, and this step really helps out in a future step, is we're going to put the elastic off to the side. I'm going to put my ruler off to the side just for a minute. I'm going to bring in my portable ironing board that I have that I can use on my tabletop because you do not want to iron on my cutting mat. What I'm going to do is I am going to give this a quick press just so it looks nice. And I already have my iron turned on, you guys. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to turn up the ends, and I'm only going to go in about 2 inches. And I'm going to measure here in just a second. But I'm just going to press under those ends. This is really going to help in a future step on these scrunchies. So just go ahead and press it under. And you guys, I'm eyeballing the press under. It's right at about 1/4 inch. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we are going to take our fabric and we are going to fold it right sides together. Okay. Now, even though I press that, I'm going to go ahead and still bring right sides together, opening up that press I just did. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler. I'm going to get my smaller ruler, a little bit easier to use. And I'm going to measure in 2 inches. And that's where I'm going to pin at. Okay. So you'll see what I mean by that when we go over to the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing on this other side. And I'm going to measure in 2 inches. Now, I've done different measurements here, and 2 inches just seems to work for me. So you guys might want to come out a little bit further, and you definitely can. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I could add another pin in there just so this stays nice and good. And what I'm going to do at the sewing machine is I'm going to start 2 inches in. So this is where my pin, I'll know. I'm going to start and I'm going to sew all the way along, and I'm going to stop at this pin. Okay, so I'm going to leave these guys totally open. Really important not to sew to the end. And of course, when we start it, we're going to backstitch, and we're going to end when we backstitch. That always secures your seam. So let's hop over to the sewing machine and let's put that seam in. Okay, so I've already got my machine threaded, and I'm using a white thread both on the top and in my bobbin, can't even talk. And again, I am going to, and I'm going to do about a 1/4 inch seam, and I like to put it in, and I've got my pin right here so I know exactly where I'm at. I'm going to put my foot down, and then I'm going to pull my pin out, okay? And I'm just going to do a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to stitch a little bit, and then I'm going to do a back stitch, secure that, okay? And I'm just going to do a stitch all the way along, 1/4 inch. Make sure you take out, I got that middle pin. I don't want to stitch over that pin. Take out that next pin. I know where to stop, do my back stitch, and I'm going to clip my threads. Okay, and I've got a nice seam all the way through. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hop back over to the machine, and I'll show you our next step. Okay, so our next step now is we need to turn this tube right side out. So we've created a tube, we've got an opening at the beginning and the end, and I just like to use a safety pin. There's other tools that you can definitely use out there to do this, but safety pin seems to work really well for me. And so I am just going to run that through. Just takes a minute to get it all the way through. I've got it all the way through. Now, I like to give my fabric a press at this point in time. You don't necessarily have to, but I just like to see where that seam is, and I kind of do 2 passes. One, I'm going to open up that, or press that seam down really nice, and then what I like to do is actually pick up where the seam is at and make that be one of my edges. I always like to do that first press first because it helps me make this one a nicer press. Okay. So now, give that one more press. You're not going to see these lines, but I just like it. You'll see in the step I'm going to add that it's nice to have that crispness. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to put in our elastic. Okay, now a trick with this elastic. You got to get it all the way through here, right? And what we want to make sure is that we don't lose it. So I like to pin my elastic right here and be careful that you don't poke yourself. And then I'm going to take the other end and put it through my safety pin and then pull it through the tube. That way I know this end here is going to stay secure. And I'm going to pull this all the way through the loop. Okay. And then when I get to the end, okay, I am going to take my pin off, And then I'm going to find that other side of the elastic, which I pinned off. And what we're going to do is we're going to take that over to the sewing machine, and we are going to do a zigzag stitch. Now, I like to do a zigzag stitch quite a few times along that. And I'm going to pin it right now because I just got to walk over to my machine so I don't lose it. But I'm going to do a zigzag stitch across that a couple times because you don't want this part of the elastic to open up. So let's hop back over to the machine. Okay, so we're over here at the machine, and I want to remind you guys that with my really thin elastic, 1/4 inch elastic, I do have it overlap. This can be a little tricky on the machine getting it in there. So what I like to do is I like to put it in there, having my pin still in there, lowering my foot, and then removing my pin. That way my elastic stays together. Now I'm going to switch it to a zigzag stitch, and I'm going to go back and forth. And so there's forward, there's backward, there's forward, and there's backwards. Okay, so I want to get a good stitch in there. Okay, so I've got those nice and secure together. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to a straight stitch on our machine. And what I'm going to do is I am going to take, and I'm going to move my camera out a little bit so I can show you guys. I'm going to take my fabric, right sides together, and it's kind of awkward, but right sides together, and we're going to sew these two together. Okay, so we've got right sides together. Now, I like to start it because you've got a lot of fabric in here because of on this little spot. So I like to start mine, and then I'll get the rest of the fabric nice and straight. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start it, do a back stitch, and then go forward a little bit, and then I can pull my fabric out here and I can finish my stitches. Okay, so and I just work it a little at a time because, like I say, you've got a lot of fabric there because of that elastic. Okay, so I wish I had a better angle for you guys, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to tell you there. Okay. Okay, and then this is what we've got. We're going to flip this baby around. Okay, and this is where I'm going to grab my scissors and just clip those few edges. Okay, and then remember that step we did where we pressed our ends at the very beginning? This is where that comes in really handy because that is all pressed together. And what I like to do is I've matched up my center seams, and I'm going to put a pin in there. Okay, and then this is where you guys can make a choice. I like putting a stitch all the way around my scrunchies because I think it looks really nice. So I'm using a white thread, so it's going to highlight it and you're going to be able to see it. Now, if you only wanted to close off where your opening is, you could either do it with your machine with a red stitch or red thread so you wouldn't see it, or you could do it by hand. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and I am going to start a little bit before where my opening is. And remember how we pressed it? This is the step why I did the press, because it's really nice and easy to follow my seam now because I've got that pressed edge. Okay, so I'm just doing a very narrow top stitch all the way around, and I'm making sure I take my pin out when I get close to it. And then you just work it as you bring it around. I've tried taking it around my free arm I've got here, and I find sometimes that pulls a little bit. So you could try that if you want to, but I just find that this seems to work really nice. And this is like 1/8 of an inch top stitch I'm doing, you guys. And I just turn it as I go. And I'm almost to where I started. I'm going to go ahead and do a little back stitch there, and I'm going to I'm gonna clip those threads. Now again, I could have used a red thread, but I kind of just like having that white offset. This is a fabric, it might not be easy for you guys to see, but it's a polka dot fabric. So there, I've got my scrunchie. So hold on and I will show you what it looks like in my hair. And here's our finished product. Thanks so much for joining me for another Inspiration Friday. I hope you like this project that Chloe inspired, making scrunchies. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel and click on that bell and YouTube will remind you whenever I upload a new video. If you have any questions, please add a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And also, don't forget to check out my blog at Fun Stuff Crafts for other DIY projects.